today is just opening this and sharing with you what it says and who Jesus actually was and what he actually said, what he actually did. And my suspicion is it will surprise you. That's certainly my experience. Looking into Christianity at university, I'd made up my mind about Jesus based on a couple of RE lessons and a couple of dodgy Channel 4 biographies. But I'd never actually engaged with it for myself. And we're trying to get you to do that this week. My greatest wish really is that you would take this away afterwards. These are free for you to take and just begin to read it yourself. Maybe some of you have started doing that already. Now, my strategy today is a risky one. We're looking at this question, what if Jesus is radically inclusive? But I'm going to look with you at one of the most shocking things that Jesus is recorded to have said. And I think when you first hear it, it is going to shock you. It might make you angry. You might be very tempted to walk out. And please don't do that. Please hear me out. But Jesus' words are extremely controversial. And they sound shocking. And the temptation for me as a Christian speaker is to miss out the most difficult things that Jesus says, to give you a kind of airbrushed, more palatable version of Jesus. And I'm not going to do that because I want you to read the whole thing. And if you read the whole thing, you'll come across the difficult things. So I thought we'd tackle them head on. It's quite a risky strategy, and it's on page 36. And you may not be able to believe your ears when we hear what Jesus does or says. Page 36, and I'm going to read from the second paragraph down, verse 24. Jesus left that place, we're actually picking up from yesterday's passage, he left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and didn't want anyone to know it, yet he couldn't keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. That, I think, is one of the most difficult, embarrassing, even awkward passages in all of Jesus' teaching. I don't know how you are with awkward situations. I don't handle them very well. I still remember how traumatized I was, age 17, on a family trip to the cathedral city of Ely, which is near where I grew up. It's basically a little village with a cathedral in it. And it's a sort of place with tea rooms that have doilies on the plates and frilly china. And we were there in this genteel tea room, kind of National Trust sort of place, basically with other people with their grandmas out on a day, that sort of thing. And as we're at the table, my sister, which is her specialism, age 14, let out a deafening burp of the kind that silenced the tea room. And everyone was so shocked, and they just looked down at their china. And I found that embarrassing, but that was nothing compared with if you'd been with Jesus on this occasion. And a woman asked Jesus for help. She's desperate. Her daughter is in the grip of this evil. And Jesus says, "Why should I help the dogs?" What? I mean, did we hear that right? Is Jesus calling a woman a dog? Certainly what he seems to be saying. I mean, what on earth do we do with that? Some Christians have tried to argue it away by pointing out that the word in Greek that this is originally written in was the word for a little dog, which is true. And so, maybe Jesus is likening her to a puppy, and we're supposed to think of Andrex dogs chasing toilet rolls. And he's saying something the equivalent of, you're cute. No, it doesn't mean that. Dogs weren't beautiful pets in the first century. They were the scavengers, the wild dogs on the streets. Jesus, it seems, is being extremely rude. I don't think he's being rude to her because she's a woman. I don't think we can explain it that way. Because elsewhere in this account, we find Jesus treats women with really surprising dignity for a first century man. And women have some of the key places in Jesus' teaching, in his dealings with people, even to the extent we saw on Monday that the key witnesses to Jesus' resurrection from the dead are all women, which is very surprising in a first century text where a woman's testimony was not considered valid in court, and yet Mark makes the women's testimony the absolute centerpiece of his account. I mean, it's a sexist culture, but Jesus is not sexist. The people he most commends, actually, in this account, you'll find out, are women. There's a widow who is much more generous in giving to God in the temple than all of the hypocritical religious men. There's another woman who loves Jesus so much that she blows in one gesture of love an extremely expensive jar of perfume. She cracks it open and spills it all over Jesus' feet. And Jesus says she's done a beautiful thing. So Jesus treats women very well and thinks very highly of them. I don't think we can explain it by her being a woman. No, we explain it by her being a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician. That's what Mark emphasizes, verse 26. She was a Greek born in Syria and Phoenicia. And you think that doesn't make it much better. Okay, Jesus isn't a sexist, I see that, but he's a racist. He calls a woman from Syria and Phoenicia a dog. There is one thing, though, in the passage, I think if you look at it closely, that is even more surprising than Jesus saying that to her. Just look again. I think there's something even more surprising. And that is her response to him. Imagine it was you, okay? So there you are with a desperate situation with your family member. You ask Jesus for help and he says, why should I help the dogs? What would you do? I would be expecting what happens next would be a slap him round the face. How dare you? How dare you call me that? And her response is very surprising. She says, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. That is surprising, isn't it? She doesn't seem to object to being called a dog. She doesn't seem to dispute her status before Jesus. She says, I'll be content if there's just some crumbs that fall from the table. That'll be enough for me. And Jesus is amazed at this, and he says, for such a reply, you can go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. See, the amazing thing about her is that she doesn't share our Western 21st century sense of entitlement. We're very sure of ourselves, aren't we, before God? We think that God owes us. We think that any kind of hardship we go through is God being unfair to us. We ought to have an easy deal. We ought to have a pleasant ride through life. And how dare God not give me everything I want? She doesn't come with that sort of set of presuppositions. She comes saying, I'm a nobody. If you want to call me a scrounging animal, I guess that's fair. That's what I am. I'm just hoping for some scraps, please. And I think that's the whole point of this story, actually. That here is somebody who realizes that she is not entitled, who will humble herself. He doesn't mind looking up to Jesus from the gutter. And Jesus is very, very impressed by this. Actually, we discover all the way through this account of Jesus that Jesus has a problem with those who are arrogant and think highly of themselves. He constantly gets into arguments with authority figures, those in power, especially those with religious power. The religious people hated Jesus. We saw that a bit yesterday. He's always trying to bring down those who are arrogant and high, and he always wants to lift up those who are humble and who will abase themselves. And I wonder whether Jesus calling her a dog, I think it's just a little test, really. How do you think of yourself? And her reply is amazing. Fair enough, Jesus, yeah. I don't think highly of myself. I don't stand on my rights. I don't think that I'm entitled. I just want crumbs. And Jesus says, in effect, well, then you've passed the test with flying colours. You're exactly the kind of person that I want to help. I wonder how you feel at the suggestion that you don't have a right to God's help. You come to Jesus and you say, my life isn't sorted out, you should sort it out. And Jesus says, no, I shouldn't sort your life out. Why should I help you? And can you imagine coming back saying, well, yeah, fair enough, Jesus. I've got no right, but maybe some crumbs from the table. Very, very surprising. Actually, more wonderful than we've yet understood, but to get the full message, we need a bit of context. So turn back a couple of pages. And I want to show you something amazing that Jesus does. So page 30 we're on now. Top of page 30. The apostles gathered round Jesus and reported to him all they'd done and taught. Then because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But Jesus answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have? He said, go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Jesus told them to make all the people sit down in the groups on the green grass. They sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He then gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of them to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Then he climbed into the boat with them and the wind died down. They were completely amazed. They had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Now, this is an account of one of the amazing miracles that Jesus does in front of eyewitnesses. And many, many people see it. And I would suggest to you it's a very good evidence that Jesus is, in fact, from God with divine authority. Because ordinarily, you can't do that. So 5,000 people, and they've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, loaves in those days they're not sort of baguettes, they're more like a bread roll. So 5 bread rolls for 5,000 people. So I did the maths. Apparently for you guys, there's over 100 of us here, and there's 240 baguettes because the Christian Union thought we'd all be hungry. It's quite a good provision. But let's do it Jesus style. So there's about 100 of us, a bit over 100 of us. So if we were to say 5,000 people with 5 of these, so one of these will do 1,000 people. So half of these will do 500 people. And half of that will do 250 people. And 2/5 of that will do 100 people. There we are. So that would be the provision for today. And what I need to do is to share it out amongst you all. So if you'd like to, I'll pass it down here. So do take as much as you eat. I know you've all just eaten, but imagine you're starving. And take off a bit and break it off and eat it. So you probably don't eat it because it will have been through quite a lot of people's fingers by that stage. But you get the idea. Now, we spread it around the whole room. It's almost gone already. We've just got 4 ladies and at the front. And then at the end, they pass out baskets to collect up the leftovers. And they get 12 baskets full. In other words, there's more leftovers at the end than there was bread at the start. And that is clearly an extraordinary miracle. Because people can't do that. Now, when I was an atheist, as a science student way back 1993. That was when I was at university. I know I didn't look that old. But I used to have a big problem with miracles. I thought miracles are clearly impossible. Science doesn't work that way. Conservation of matter, etc. You can't multiply bread, and you certainly can't walk on water at room temperature. It just doesn't work that way. My logic was kind of circular, actually, because it went something like this. If there's no God, then the laws of physics is all that there is. And the laws of physics don't ordinarily allow you to change the amount of matter that you have, and therefore it didn't happen. It's kind of circular, isn't it? Because I could switch the other way and say if there is a God, and if the laws of physics are just a description of the way in which he runs the world, then he could, if he wanted to really get everyone's attention, mess with the laws of physics, because that would really make us notice. If there's not a God, this can't have happened. If there is a God, it's quite a good idea, isn't it? I mean, imagine I were to say to you today, well done for coming this lunchtime. You're very fortunate to meet me because actually I'm God. The Christians are looking slightly nervous at this point. They think I've flipped. Nice to see you. I'm your creator. And you would say to me pretty soon, well, Andrew, we're not inclined to believe you. Is there anything that you can do to prove that you're God? I say, well, I'm afraid not. I'm like, I can't do anything that anyone else in the room can't do. Can't mess with the laws of physics. And at that point you say, send him to the asylum, right? He's mad. Because if God really did step into the world as a human being, I think it would be very surprising if he couldn't do some quite unusual things, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you expect God, if he was walking around the earth, to do some things that nobody else could do? I think it's very likely that he would do miracles, actually. And here we have one. He multiplies bread to feed 5,000 people. He walks on water to reach a boat in the middle of the sea. And everyone is utterly terrified. By the way, their reaction tells you that these aren't just credulous, pre-scientific people who don't realize that you can't walk on water. You know, I used to think, it's easy for them to believe in miracles because they don't understand anything about science. Well, they don't understand a lot about science. But you don't need to know that much about science to know that when you get out of a boat, you sink up to about here. And I reckon if you're a fisherman, you figure that out pretty early in your life. And that's why when they see someone walking on the surface of the water, they don't say, hey, we're scientifically credulous, say fair enough. They go, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on? Are we dreaming? Is this some sort of hallucination? They react precisely the same you would expect a rational person to respond to something utterly extraordinary. Real eyewitness evidence that this man Jesus is someone very unusual. He multiplies bread, he walks on water. But there's actually more to it even than that. You probably know that Jesus was a Jew, and he came in a long line of Jewish history. And the people of Israel had known about God for a very long time before the coming of Jesus. God had various dealings with them. And way, way back, about 1,400 years before Jesus, there was a guy called Moses. And maybe you know a bit about him if you've seen films like Prince of Egypt or Exodus, Gods and Kings. It's not a very good film, actually. It's not very biblically faithful at all. But you might know something about the story that God's people were slaves in Egypt, and God set about rescuing them. And he rescued them by sending plagues against Pharaoh, by ultimately parting the waters of the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went through on dry land. At the other side, there was a desert and there was no food, and God miraculously provided food from heaven. And then finally they came to a mountain, Mount Sinai, where God gave them the 10 Commandments. It's a really key part of Jewish history, more than 1,000 years before Jesus. And actually, everything about this miracle tells you that Jesus is Moses 2.0. This is that great rescue that every Jewish person knows about, but it's the rerun. It's the sequel. It's the bigger version of the rescue. There's just loads about it that just rings bells. So, for example, they're in the desert and there's no food, and God miraculously provides food. Every Israelite would know about that in the time of Moses. And then Jesus does it again. Or they're out at sea, and then Jesus walks on the sea as if he's walking on the land. And every Jewish person recognizes the flashback to the time that the people crossed the sea as if walking on dry land. There's other things as well. They go up a mountain like Mount Sinai. Jesus says, don't be afraid, I am, which is the name that God spoke from the burning bush to Moses. Everything about it says this is a miracle that is reminiscent of the great rescue. And so if you understand what's going on, it's not just Jesus doing a party trick. It's Jesus doing a sign. A sign has significance. There's clues in the name. And here is Jesus doing a miracle that points to the fact that he has come to rescue people. Not just rescue people politically from Egypt, as in the time of Moses, but rescue people spiritually from being trapped in the dominion of Satan to being rescued to belong again to a heavenly Father that loves them. And Jesus says, and he demonstrates, I am all about that rescue. Every Jewish person would get those echoes. And if you're Jewish today, I guess you remember the story of Moses and you'll recognize some of those motifs. Feeding in the desert, crossing water by walking, I am the name of God, and the mountain. You'll get the echoes. Others of us here who aren't Jewish, we need a bit of background. Now let's turn back to this story where Jesus calls a woman a dog. Page 36. This woman was a Greek born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. Verse 27, first let the children eat all they want, he told them, for it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. You notice something else strange about this? Maybe we're so blinded by the offense of it, I can't believe he said dog, that we miss the other strange thing about the verse. She hasn't asked for food, has she? She's asked for an exorcism. Please drive the demon out of my daughter. And Jesus says, why should I feed you? It's like Jesus got a bit confused. No, she's not hungry. She's just worried about her daughter because her daughter's in the grip of evil. Yeah, I'm not going to give you any food. Why should I give a dog any food? And she sort of goes with the strange metaphor. And she goes, well, yeah, just some crumbs would be okay. She doesn't want crumbs. She wants her daughter to be exercised. So how did a conversation about releasing a little girl from the grip of evil turn into a conversation about food? Well, because what's just happened is, and everyone remembers this, is Jesus just fed 5,000 people with a little bit of food. And it didn't just mean he could do a party trick, it meant he came to be the great rescuer. And she's basically saying, is there any chance that we could get rescued as well? But you see, we're not Jewish. So we didn't have any part in the Moses rescue. It was Israel that was rescued out of Egypt. We're not Jewish, so we don't really look forward to our Messiah because that was the Jewish promised king. But is there any left over? Could we have just a few crumbs of the miraculous rescue? And Jesus says, yeah, you can. Especially because of the amazing way that you responded, not by being offended or being entitled or being how dare you or what right has God not to help me, or you just come humbly saying, just a beggar in the gutter, I need some crumbs, please. And then Jesus doesn't just give a few crumbs. This is the wonderful thing about it. The woman's daughter is then fine. Turn over the page. Page 38. And let me just read it. And it's going to sound very familiar, I think, this episode. Verse 1, top of the page. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to him, I have compassion on these people. They've already been with me for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they'll collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered, but where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? How many loaves do you have? It's sounding a bit familiar, isn't it? It's uncannily similar. 7, they said. He told the crowd to sit on the ground. When he'd taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave the disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks to them and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 men were present. He sent them away. He got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. Everything about it is the same, isn't it? A big crowd. They're hungry because they've been listening to Jesus' teaching. They've got no food. The disciples have a hopelessly inadequate amount of food, this time 7 bread rolls for 4,000 people. It's not going to be enough, but it is enough. Jesus multiplies it miraculously. They get baskets full of leftovers. Then Jesus goes on a boat journey. I mean, it is just the same as chapter 6. Why does Jesus do it twice? He feeds the 5,000, then he feeds the 4,000. It's almost identical. But the difference is they're on the other side of the Sea of Galilee this time. And if you know your geography of the first century, you probably don't, but the background is, one side is where the Jews live, the other side is where the likes of the Syrophoenicians live. And far from being sort of reluctant to dish out a few little crumbs to the dogs, Jesus gives to the dogs a full-blown rescue, number 2. In other words, you non-Jewish people, no historical claim to the Exodus, to the rescue of Moses, no historic expectation of the Messiah, the Jewish king, no grounds on which you can demand that God owes you. But if you'll come humbly, I'll give you the same. A great rescue. Full forgiveness, restored relationship with God. The Jewish Messiah can be your Messiah. The Jewish hope of a promised land can be your future promised land. Dogs can be saved too. And in a first century mindset, if a Syrophoenician can get in, anyone can get in. Now, I'm not Jewish, so I started life in the same position as her. I had no claim to God's historic promises. I had no share in the rescue of Moses. I was an outsider. But now I can be included, because Jesus says, I haven't just come for the children of Israel, I've come for everyone. Everyone who is willing to humble themselves. If you're easily offended by Jesus and you think, Jesus, you owe me, then he doesn't. Jesus is always getting into arguments with people who thought they were very important, and he wants to squish them. But Jesus always showing compassion to those who come humbly. And when she says, yeah, call me a dog if you like, I just wanted some crumbs, Jesus says, I love that answer. And I'm willing you to treat you not as a dog, but as a brother, a sister, a friend. I'm willing to give you a share in the rescue. You can come too. And I guess that's his message to everybody in Bristol, whoever you are. However far you might be in your upbringing from the God of Israel. Maybe you've never even thought about him until this week. Maybe you don't know him. Maybe you're in a lifestyle that your conscience is very far from the lifestyle he calls people to. Maybe you know you've broken every single one of the 10 Commandments several times over. Maybe you've realized that you have no claim on God. There's nothing he owes you. But you'd love some crumbs if he had any to spare. And Jesus' answer for you is really, really good news. Yeah, not just crumbs, he says, but a full-blown Exodus rescue, proved by a miracle. But maybe you're angry because you thought you were important and you're insulted, and how dare he? And you will find that again and again you'll clash with Jesus. He hasn't got time for those who think highly of themselves. But he'll be so kind and generous to those who come to him with nothing. I'm very grateful for you listening. I hope it's surprised you, intrigued you. I hope you'll keep reading. My suggestion yesterday was, why don't take this away yourself and do a bit of reading yourself. And my suggestion was, rather than reading the whole thing, it's actually only half of it because the back is a study guide, so it's not as long as it looks. It's about so big. Rather than reading the half the thing, I'm suggesting you just read one chapter, but you read it slowly enough to think about it. Like we've done today, we thought quite carefully about some of the things Jesus says. Read one chapter, think about it, and why not annotate it, scribble on it, tick everything you agree with, but a cross against everything that annoys you, underline anything you don't understand, and then why not meet a Christian for coffee, which they will buy, and go through your annotations. So all it will cost you is 1 hour of your life, one chapter of this, and one coffee. But if it's useful, then do the same for chapter 2. If that's useful, same for chapter 3. There's maximum of 16 free coffees in here, or 16 expensive coffees for your Christian friend. But please engage with it. Jesus will not say what you expect. There'll be things he says that outrages you. But ultimately, I think things he says that are really quite wonderful. So there's my challenge. Thanks for listening. I'm going to